Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. It's hard for a lot of people to reconcile what a lot of biologists say about predators and predator control when we often identify predators as the number one cause of mortality, whether it be a nest or poults or hens or whatever. But you brought up some stuff that you had been working on, particularly related to nest predation, that we thought it would be really interesting to go into here.
Sure, yeah. No, I'm glad to be back, right? I mean,
you're our first repeat guest.
Hopefully, yeah. I don't know if that's an honor or if I just screwed up so bad the first time. I got to come back and redeem myself.
We're glad to have you back. So thanks for taking the time. But I will mention we may be actually releasing them out of order, so this may end up being the one that goes up first.
Awesome.
Even though we recorded the other one.
That's all right. I'm back both ways, so it'll work then. So yeah, no. Predation it's like the third rail of being a turkey ecologist. For people who kind of think about the whole deal with trains and grabbing hold of the third rail and everything. I mean, it's kind of weird to discuss because the emotion around the concept of predation and the management of predation is very pronounced in our field. And it's an issue that as scientists, there are very few hard truths, correct? Like the things that have very strict answers to them. And the popular literature has, in a lot of cases, predated the scientific information on the relative veracity of how predation affects upland game birds, turkey specifically, and how we can address it. A few basic, and I'm just going to talk, and you guys jump in and tell me what you want me to restructure. Effectively, 4 out of every 5 nests is lost to some sort of depredation event. Now, and I want to be, and I think this is one of the things that you guys want me to talk about. I'm going to be real clear up front for all the listeners. I view predation or depredation as 2 separate activities. There is predation and then there's scavenging. Mm-hmm. And we need to be really clear throughout, for my opinion, and I'm going to try and be clear, as we kind of go through this discussion, in that historically, and I'm at fault for this. I've written quite a few papers on predation and what eats turkey nests and what eats turkeys. So this is probably partially my fault. We tend to lump everything under this concept of predation. Nest predation is what we call it. Mm-hmm. But actually, there's really 2 processes, and I've come around to this the last couple of years. There's really about 2 processes that are going on. You have some event. So number 1 is what I'm going to call predation. Okay, some event that causes the nest to immediately fail. Right, a coyote or a bobcat predates the female. A great horned owl predates the female. Something comes in and it eats the female and it eats the eggs, or it attempts to eat the female, and then the eggs are I'm going to eat the eggs while I'm here. Okay, and that event is it's a very short time frame event. Okay, mm-hmm. Bobcat comes in, tries to land on the hen. Hen gets away. eats eggs as a backup, as a secondary type of thing, right?
A consolation
Coyote,
prize.
Yeah, consolation. The consolation prize is I didn't get the hen, but I'm gonna eat all her eggs. Coyote does the same thing. Snakes come in, eat eggs right out from underneath the female wild turkey, right? Sometimes they'll eat one, sometimes they'll eat 8, sometimes they'll eat them all. These are predation events, okay? But there's a second event that has historically been lumped as a predation event that I do not now, and this is professional growth in my mind, do not now think constitutes a predation event. That is scavenging. That is post predation event. Something else finds the abandoned nest and eats it. This is typically when you see things like a skunk or a opossum, a raccoon, jays, your corvids. So your ravens and your crows will often do this. Feral pigs, squirrels, all the little other things. They're not. You got real dark right there. I feel like I need to wave my hands here.
I feel like I need to do that at least once an episode. I let the lights go off, so we make a.
I think you just blew his mind.
Maybe so, or at least the light bulb. Yeah. So, but when we think about the concept of predation in turkey ecology, and we tend to just group everything together, right? We group it underneath the nest failed. Correct. Mm-hmm. The nest was depredated, and we've historically, and again, I'm at fault for this. We've historically just said, "Hey, the nest failed. It's a predation event because all the eggs are crushed or whatever." Right?
So,
yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Brett, I've got a few questions. One, it reminded me of something in the episode that we just recorded recently. We said we were going to ask you about it. Mm-hmm. So if whether it's a hunter or a predator or whatever bumps a hen, she flushes from the nest. Mm-hmm. How much does she come back? Like what?
No, that's a great question. So turkeys are different. Okay, Easterns are really, really flighty. Back in the old days, when I started, 20 years ago now, we were still using VHF. We would actually go and flush the hens off the nest when they were incubating to collect things like clutch sizes and exact nest location and put out flagging and everything. The same thing we still do for waterfowl, right? And waterfowl really come back to nest very well. They fly off and then whenever the chain drags over them, then they come right back in. We would see nest abandonment rates from a low of about 10% to an upwards of 50% in some cases. I'd say probably a good average number would be you lose about one of 5 females would just abandon her nest if you disturbed it for any reason, right?
And that's particular to Easterns.
Easterns, Rios, and Goulds. We've looked at it in all 3 of them. So
so about 20% of the time, 20% they don't come back.
Whenever you disturb them. Now, for us, that kind of shifted with the onset of GPS, right? Mm-hmm. We no longer had to go flush the nest to find them because we were getting higher resolution data on those birds as they were sitting on the nest. So we could just kind of, okay, she's still over there on the nest. Boom. We didn't need to go measure the nest site because if the nest failed, let's be honest, we were measuring how many eggs they had. We know how many eggs a turkey has now. We don't need to keep counting it, right? Mm-hmm. So it was basically for the location. We wanted to know exactly where the nest was because that's where we take all our vegetation measurements and, everything centers on the nest. Well, now with GPS, we can get within the size of the tables we're all sitting at on where the nest was, right? Just based on the clusters of points. Mm-hmm. And we have all of the spatial temporal data on that hen. So if her nest gets, if there's some sort of depredation event, we see it in the GPS data. So we didn't have to we don't disturb them anymore. So I can't think of the last time we'd had for many of our studies, a human caused abandonment from a just regular birds leaving right now. I actually have this number written down because I looked. It's about 10% right now on something pushes the hen off and she's still alive. Okay. Because that's also a different event, right?
Yeah, so basically, like a coyote or something comes through and flushes the hen, and she
Mhm.
didn't die from it, but she abandons the nest
She
as a
abandoned the
result.
nest.
About 10%
More
of the
ample
nesting
in
attempts.
yeah, it's
Okay.
much more regular occurrence in juveniles.
And you've actually had some cameras over nest, right?
A lot, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we don't
Okay.
do it as much anymore, but yeah,
Right.
historically we put a lot of cameras on nests.
And
Yeah, I
so
remember looking at one of your studies from Rio's, I think, that it was probably 10
Justin
years ago now.
Dreibelvis's work? Yeah, that was
Yeah, I
probably
can't.
Justin's work.
Okay.
kind of along those same lines, Brett, when you were those cameras just set to take stills or they take video?
Oh, man. The ones we were using in Texas were just taking stills, if I remember right, because the
Okay.
technology wasn't
Yeah.
as advanced back then. I
Yeah,
mean,
sure.
Yeah, I think
I've
that's what I
advanced in
remember too.
age and technology's got a lot better. We did get a few videos from some of the work we did on Goulds out in Arizona with
Yeah.
Arizona Game and Fish. But we also had stills for those. We haven't shot a ton of video, and to be honest with you, putting cameras on nests has kind of gone out of favor because of the
Right.
abandonment issue
Right.
and because of the fact that the GPS data gives us such a good look at that kind of stuff.
Right.
There's been a few studies that are still working on trying to identify what predator, what species are disturbing nests, but
Mhm.
most
Well,
of most everybody's kind of walked away from cameras a little.
right. Well, where I was going with that is I wondered if you had any data to speak to, the rates of a hen actually being flushed off the nest with various predators. Did you have any way to
Yeah,
look at that?
bobcats and coyotes are the two biggies that we
For sure.
see for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, just because they just run up on them, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Mhm.
coyotes are coursing. They're running around. And I don't want to say that they stumble upon them. I mean, there's some sort of a search image there, but they just plow up into them, and that pushes them off. We usually what's interesting is whenever we had cameras on nests, we usually would see something bobcat, coyote, owl trying to predate the nest, but we'd also get records of stuff that came after, you know, the
Yeah.
scavenging part of it. And
Right.
and
Mhm.
it's a tough nut to crack on this whole idea of predation because what are we actually managing for? When you
Mhm.
start talking about managing wild turkey habitat. And I'm gonna, if you guys will prompt me, I'll come back to that. But let me finish the predation thought first. So going back to this idea of nest depredation, um, we've always umbrellaed everything under predation, but it's really a predation attempt on the female, and then a scavenging event post after the fact, right?
Mhm.
And the species that do that are different. I mean, the joke I make whenever I do a public meeting or something is, all right, everybody raise your hand who thinks that raccoons are predators of wild turkeys. And every hand in the audience will go up. And I'll say, okay, everybody who's seen a raccoon run across the field and drag down a wild turkey, please continue to hold your hand in the air. And immediately every hand goes down. So when we think about predation, what we're really thinking about is two separate processes that are not occurring at the same time. You have an event that somehow causes the female to die or leave. And if she does either one of those things, the nest is going to fail, irrespective of what comes and eats it later.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Um, and then if she doesn't come back, if the nest fails, if she comes back and the nest has already been eaten, that's not a predation event. That's a scavenging event.
Mhm.
And that's something that I've probably misclassified in my career. And like I said, anybody who doesn't accept the fact that they can be wrong, you're not in the right business if you're in the business of science. Because I made more mistakes than any 10 people. But I think about the species that we generally talk about being most prevalent for nest depredation in this case, right? And it's the common ones. Raccoons, foxes, you have bobcats, coyotes. Nobody ever talks about snakes, although I bet snakes are probably 40% of the nests we lose.
We did in our intro episode.
All right, good. Snakes are a huge deal that
Yeah.
are unmanageable for and are ubiquitous on the landscape everywhere, right? You know, ravens, you know, your corvids, your ravens, your crows, your blue jays, your green jays if you're in Texas. You know, but then your possums and you know, your weasels, your mink, those kind of things, you know, will happen to find them. So managing to address predation is not really a thing. It's not. What we do as scientists, which I do this and you guys do this, we all do this, is we go to a nest site and we measure a bunch of stuff, right? We measure how tall the vegetation is and how thick it is and what the composition of species is and how far the trees are from it and how much canopy cover and a whole bunch of other garbage, right? That we measure on the ground. No, seriously. And for the listeners out there, all of you that hunt with upland game bird dogs, I hunt with Springer Spaniels. They're both laying on the floor here. It makes no difference how much vegetation is between my dog and a woodcock. Okay? If she runs up close enough to it, she's going to find that woodcock on the ground. So we measure a bunch of stuff that may not matter to try and determine what actually impacts whether a nest is successful or not. So maybe we're thinking about this whole and here we go, okay? This is where you guys get to start asking questions. Maybe we're thinking about this whole concept of predation incorrectly, in that we need to stop managing for the vegetation that the turkeys like, which we obviously generally know what it is, but there's no certainty to that based on all of our nesting studies. And we start managing for vegetative communities that predatory species don't like. Because if we can do that, we're still creating good habitat. But if we can do that, we can facilitate, hopefully, a reduction in the impact of predation. How you do that, I don't know. Because it would require us to spend more time studying coyotes and bobcats and great horned owls or whatever, and less time concerning ourselves with what the density of raccoons or possums or skunks or feral hogs is on the landscape. And some of the work that we've started with, and some of Aaron Ulrich's thesis looked at whether or not predatory type species were showing avoidance criteria for certain places where turkeys were nesting. And there's some evidence that they are. Mm-hmm. You know, there's some evidence that some species select to not go in areas where turkeys are nesting at, and those nests are generally more successful. It's not super strong, but it's something worth thinking about. And you've got to take it in context of what we're really trying to manage for. We can't manage against scavenging, and there's no reason to.
Well, let me ask you a question about that, Brett. Sure. It's been kind of bouncing around in my head while you were talking, and I think it's important to articulate very clearly and make sure that I'm
You'll do a better job of it than I will.
No, I'm talking about you. I'm just trying to prompt you to make sure that everybody's with you. How often does a raccoon actually push a hen off the nest and then get the eggs when you've been doing this?
You know, I'm not. It happens. It happens, but pretty infrequently.
Usually, so even though raccoons are very commonly in the literature identified as the primary nest predator, you're saying the majority of that you think is scavenging, not predation.
Scavenging after the female has run off. I've got a picture.
That's a pretty important point.
No, it is. I mean, but female, and this is what it is. Female turkeys will defend their nest site. Raccoons aren't that big. And I'm not saying, for all the listeners out there, so we can be clear, I'm not saying that a raccoon and a turkey in a fist fight, that the raccoon wouldn't always win or that the turkey wouldn't run away, okay? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that raccoons are one of the predominant species that we criticize for being a nest predator.
Yeah, I say that's the primary species targeted in a trapping campaign.
Absolutely, 100%. But there's not a lot of data to suggest that they're pushing females off of nests. There's a lot of data to suggest that they come in after the fact and eat eggs.
Yeah, they're really good at finding a bunch of eggs that aren't going to make it anyway.
Yes, and there was some work done in Louisiana in gosh, how long ago was that now? Almost 10 years ago, I guess, 10 or 11 years ago, something like that. That looked at raccoon foraging ecology, where the raccoons were at on the landscape eating. It was at the Sherburne Wildlife Management Area, and it was Michael Burns' dissertation, if I remember.
Yeah,
right.
that's what I was going to ask you. Yep.
Yeah, it was Mike Burns' dissertation, and basically Mike found that raccoons were not in the areas that turkeys were nesting in.
Yeah, I think Mike Cherry, some of his stuff in Florida, they had a very similar thing. It aligned really well with Burns.
Sure, and just on raccoons, T. Wayne Shortner in Texas, he's at Tarleton State University right now. He's a department chair up there. T. Wayne did his PhD on turkeys at Texas A&M, and he went back and looked at all the raccoon trapping records relative to all the poult count information for the state of Texas. It was don't ask me when the paper was published, maybe 05 or 06 in SEPWA, and basically found there was no relationship between raccoon abundance and brood counts, which you would assume if raccoons were having a lot of impact, that there'd be some sort of relationship with higher raccoon numbers, lower brood counts. And what it comes back to in my mind on this, Marcus, is it's very simple. A raccoon is a scavenger. A possum is a scavenger. They're passive foragers. Maybe that's a good way to look at it, right? And a skunk, a raccoon, a possum, they're passive. They're not active hunters like a bobcat or a coyote. But we group them in the same groups when we think about the predation event. I guarantee to you a possum has, I can't say I guarantee, I'm 99.99% sure that a possum's probably not pushing a turkey off of a nest. Same with a skunk. Probably with a raccoon. Same with feral pigs. Feral pigs are, somebody will say, oh, well, we saw the picture on the internet of the feral pig carrying the turkey in its mouth. Yeah, it jumped it underneath a deer feeder, right? When there was like 40 of them there and it came blowing in on it. Feral pigs aren't just running around trying to pounce on turkeys on the landscape, right? They're passive scavenging foragers. And when you think about that in context, it makes sense. We very rarely get pictures of raccoons and turkeys together at a nest site or any of these species. So immediately we think, oh, the raccoon pushed the hen off the nest. And then you start putting it together with data on where the hen's at. Oh, the hen wasn't anywhere near the nest when the raccoon was there. Yeah. She pushed off 5 hours earlier. And then
you see those videos though when they are together, the hen is running the raccoon or the possum or whatever off.
I got a great picture of, and I can find it. I wish I would have had it handy. I got two great pictures I should have brought today. I have a fantastic picture, it's pretty low res, of a Rio Grande who is bowed up on about a 7 or 8 foot indigo snake. And that snake is just boom, like this. And that hen she is so bowed up and forward, she is flat. I mean, every feather on her is forward. And I got amazing. Another one that and I'll send it to you guys later. I got another one, and I think that I'm correct on this, and I challenge anybody to prove me wrong. I think that I have the only photograph of a feral hog that actually pushed a turkey off of a nest that's in existence right now. Because we happen to have a camera on a nest site, one of my grad students way back in Texas did, and you could just see the turkey's like tip of her tail fan going out of the picture as a hog sliding in underneath prickly pear, right? So, but whenever we see pictures at nests, it's always just the species that's probably going to eat something, right? And we attribute that to predation. And I think that we've really got to start thinking from a biological perspective, start thinking about those topics separately. There's things that try to eat the hen. And then I think it was consolation prize, right, Will?
Yeah.
There's things that try to eat the hen. And if they don't eat the hen, they predate the nest. And then there's things that if they eat the hen or scare the hen off, the nest sits by the wayside. And and I want to talk about that because that's really interesting, an interesting point. We collect and have been for the last 6 years eggshells, whole eggs and eggshells from our nest. I have got freezers downstairs in our building full of nothing but nest specific eggs. If any event that caused the female to leave caused the eggs to get eaten, we wouldn't have any of those. Like a feral pig, if they were to push a turkey hen off a nest, they're going to eat every single egg that's there and it's going to be done, right? We regularly, I would say, collect eggs from 90 to 95% of our nest that the female has left. We wait 2 days to make sure she doesn't come back. We regularly collect eggs from, I'd say, probably 90% of those now, because we've got the high resolution GPS data.
So something has flushed the hen or killed it.
Flushed or killed the hen.
Yeah, and then you come back 2 days later and there's still eggshells there.
The eggs are still there, right? But when they're not there, we'd historically, in the old days, back when we were doing VHF, when they're not there, we wouldn't come back for like a week, or 5 or 6 days, and maybe that time frame is when those scavenging species would come in. One of my grad students, Justin, wrote a paper. I'm going to forget the salient details. I think it was in the Wilson Journal of Ornithology, or Journal of Field Ornithology.
What's the name?
Justin Dreibelbus. I think it was in 2008 or something.
Okay.
And
we provide the links to any of them.
We can find it. He wrote a couple. And one of them had a discussion of how many different species predated this one turkey nest. And how many different, and I say predated in the paper, but I shouldn't have. I think I said were present in the paper, because they weren't really predating it, right? I mean, at what point is predation over with? So he found that some of these species were 4 or 5 times. Different species would show up over the course of the eggshells being, eaten up and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I think that let me wrap that part up. From a conservation and management perspective of turkeys, right? Does predation have an impact? Absolutely. I mean, we know that probably 4 of every 5 nests fail due to depredation. Now, broods are a different thing, right? They're working on the landscape and whatnot, but 4 out of every 5 nests are predated. But they're not being predated by what people say are predating them. And that's the point I want to drive home. The hen might be being predated by a bobcat or a coyote or an owl or a hawk or an eagle or something like that, or a car, But the eggs the hen's not being run off by a possum or a raccoon or a skunk with the level of, or a feral pig, with the level of frequency that we have led people to believe. And I think that that's important for us from a conservation perspective, because if we can start managing lands, I don't want to say differently and I don't want to say better, that are suboptimal for potential predator species, but are equally optimal for turkeys, that's a win for everybody. Mm-hmm. Feral pigs are generally tied, as an example, and I'm of the general minority, I think, in the world, and that I don't feel that the wild pig, the feral pig, has a very large impact on wild turkeys at all. As a matter of fact, I think that what impacts it does have is probably more spatial disturbance related, out of nest depredation, as opposed to nest depredation or nest scavenging.
So like they just don't like to be in the same place, so the turkeys avoid the pigs?
Feral pigs generally are, they're in riparian corridors. Turkeys nest in uplands. Feral pigs are usually rooting around. You can't find that many pictures of feral pigs, chasing turkeys, across the field and eating them, right? And diet's... sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I meant. Like when you said the spatial disturbance, you just mean that turkeys are... Like if pigs come in the field, the turkeys are going to leave.
Yeah, they're going to leave. I mean, they're going to displace each other, right? But and the problem with, I say this, no, There's been a lot of gut studies done on what feral pigs eat. A lot. Using techniques that I can't even spell. More or less apply, right? Maybe Will could. But they never find avian material in them, and they never find turkey material in them. Even in some of the highest density turkey areas in the United States, like the Savannah Riverside, I saw one. It doesn't exist. I'm not saying they don't eat eggs. I'm saying that they're not pushing hens off a nest at anywhere near the clip people think they are. And for feral pigs specifically, the reason that they have, and again, I'm not a fan of feral pigs, right? I mean, we could, if we killed all of them on the landscape, I'd be perfectly fine with that. I don't care. But in this particular context, the reason they've gotten such a bad rap is because we go out and we use artificial nesting studies, and they're scavengers. And if they find a pile of tasty tidbits on the landscape, of course they're going to eat it. And several studies that I've seen have went out and put a pile of tasty tidbits of chicken eggs or whatever on the landscape, and then whenever the pig, right in the middle of a pig's range, and then whenever the pig swoops in and eats it, they refill it. Like that's a trough. They're feeding the pigs, and then whenever you see an estimate that pigs are responsible for 30% of turkey nest mortality based on a bunch of chicken eggs put inside a pig's range, that's farcical. I mean, it's not even within the realm of scientific probability. Because I mean, if you think about sea turtle nests, right? Whenever sea turtles come in and nest, feral pigs are out there on the beaches predating sea turtle nests constantly because it's a trough. It's a feeding event. But we do the same thing in an upland system to try and study turkey ecology, and we blame feral pigs for eating all the turkeys whenever we're just creating a trough out there. Will had a student that did a study that I was fortunate enough to be engaged with. I don't think she had hardly any feral pigs on her dummy nests, right? Will?
No, we just didn't have many pigs in that area.
There weren't pigs in the area.
Right.
Right.
So
I mean,
what?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So in that situation, there's some obvious drawbacks to the artificial nest. But do you think that same pig comes across that same nest with the hen sitting on it, and he either ignores her or he runs her off? I mean, how do you think that plays out when she's present?
I think that if he ran her off, there wouldn't be a Rio Grande in Texas. How about that? I think that if you ran her off, we wouldn't have any turkeys in Alabama. I mean, they're Louisiana. I mean, these places are ubiquitous with feral hogs, right?
Right.
Now, I think that gut instinct, because it's really hard to study the species to species level interaction, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's really difficult. My gut instinct on this process is pigs don't see turkeys that on a nest are that big, hunkered down, right? They don't see them as a predation item, and they don't interact with them that often. So they probably don't push them off of the nest as we would expect something like a bobcat to do. I just because people will be listening or probably yelling at me right now, I absolutely agree that there are going to be times when a sounder comes through and it blows up turkey nest. 100%. Okay. I don't think that 30% of the nests that get predated on the landscape, which would be half of the total number of nests, are due to feral pigs. That's farcical. And I'll challenge anybody to disagree with me on that one. And I'll have that debate all day long. I think that females are a lot more willing to sit tight if they know they're not in predation danger. For instance, snakes. We regularly will find snakes at nest sites where the hens are still on the nest, and we've got pictures of snakes underneath females predating the nest while the hen is still on the nest. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, we've got pictures of the hen pecking the crap out of the snake and lining her eggs back up. Yeah.
I saw a video last nesting season. So it was making the rounds online, but a hen was really getting after a snake, just tearing it up.
Absolutely.
But I think she already had her pulse at that point. But yeah, that's interesting.
They get rough.
They sneak in there sometimes.
Oh, yeah, a fox. We had a Gould's, the craziest bird I ever seen in my life. We had a Gould's wild turkey in Arizona. She sat on the nest, and a fox, okay? I'm not talking a rat. I mean, a freaking fox has its head underneath her, trying to get eggs out. We assume. I mean, I don't know if they're talking or whatnot, but we think it's trying to get at the eggs under the hen that is sitting on the nest. She didn't flush. He came back. Well, I don't know if it was he or she, but the fox came back over multiple nights, never flushed off her nest, and successfully hatched her brood.
What?
And he stole some eggs out of it.
We think. I mean, we couldn't tell. She had bears. She had bears within 5 feet of her nest site. And this is not she was up at the base of a tree or next to a creek, and she had bears like walking behind her. And they didn't even recognize she was. If I'm a bear, a bunch of eggs is a tasty snack, right? Did they not smell her? That goes against everything that we think of, olfactory senses in these critters, that they can walk between, here in my front door, right? The fox had its head underneath her. She never left. We had quaddies out there. I don't know about you guys. If I see a quaddie in the wild, I'm running the other way. Little creepy monkey-looking things. I'm gone.
I'm going to have to Google that.
Yeah.
How do I spell it?
I think it's Coatis.
Yeah,
down in Southern
okay.
Arizona.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was not saying that word correctly.
I've said it wrong my whole life.
But maybe I said it wrong. But we have pictures of them within 6 or 7 feet of her on the nest.
Yeah.
So either she was literally the indestructible turkey, or we don't understand the predation process with these birds nearly as well as we thought we did. And I don't know the answer to that.
Who says ignoring your problems doesn't make them go away?
Yeah.
Well, clearly it did in her case.
Yeah.
I think, Brett, that one thing I really appreciate that you're laying out a different point of view on this and challenging everybody to think about it. I really appreciate that, and thanks for coming on the show to do it. I want to make sure
he hangs up on me. It's like, we are getting him out of here now.
Yeah, I'm just
we're
waiting.
We're actually edit you out of this episode. I'm just kidding.
I'm just waiting on the butt.
No.
Okay.
I want to make sure that I understand and the numbers here.
Sure, I get kind of rambly sometimes.
So I think you said 4 out of 5 are lost to predation.
Generally speaking, we think that about 80% of our nests are lost to some act of the female getting either eaten or pushed off, and then the eggs getting eaten.
Okay, so but if I'm hearing you correctly, when you say 4 out of 5, that's still something either ate the hen or flushed her off, trying to get her or spooked her away, and then ate the eggs. That is not including the nest that she gets flushed and then something scavenges it, or
that is that would be. So say a female. So, and this is where predation gets really messy, right?
Yeah.
So there's like different tracks. So you can have a female who's on a nest and she gets eaten right then on the spot.
Yep.
Okay,
That's
a predation event.
Right.
A female's on the nest and she gets pushed off of the nest, and whatever pushed her off of the nest eats the eggs right then.
Yep.
That's a predation event. Okay.
Yep.
Female's on the nest and she gets pushed off the nest because something tries to eat her and doesn't come back. And something else comes in and scavenges the raccoon the next day, comes in and scavenges the eggs either before she gets back or she never comes back at all. That's an abandonment and scavenging.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 basic things that can happen. We have lumped
see where. Yeah, I can see why they would be lumped, and I can also see why it's hard to wrap your head around. But also, I think I already asked you to reiterate this, but
Sure.
you're saying that the vast majority of times that the hen gets flushed off, whether she gets eaten or she just abandons it, or maybe she's going to come back, the vast majority of the time that happens, it is not a raccoon or a possum or
That's
any of these other species.
exactly what I'm saying. I mean, it's more likely, most likely, coyote, bobcat, and some sort of large avian predator.
Like
Your
a great horned
raccoons,
owl.
possums,
Yeah.
skunks, they're coming in after the fact. Now, this is weird. It's a process question, right?
Mhm.
All three of these processes start with the hen being removed from the equation. Okay.
Yes.
She's either predated or she's flushed off and she doesn't return, or she's flushed off and she returns. The hen gets removed out of the equation. Anything that happens after she's out of the equation is irrelevant from a conservation perspective. Right?
That's what where I was wanting to get to is exactly what you just said, is that, well, if you go and remove all the raccoons, those eggs still are gone.
Possums, ravens, whatever else.
Even if they just lay there, they don't even need to be eaten by something. Yeah, they're done. If the hen's gone, their eggs are done.
So, Brett, has anybody actually published anything on trying to tease out these different predation processes on nests where we could go to and look at what proportion went this way versus that?
It's hard because you have to be able to identify what pushed the hen off the nest. And that would require video, which then puts you at risk of disturbing nests that you don't want to disturb. Now, especially where we're seeing declining populations, there was some work. Oh, the name of the faculty member, the scientist, is escaping me. Susan, maybe. She was at Texas A&M in Uvalde, and she had tagged some bobcats on, maybe it was that Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch up there in Roby, Texas, and looked at how the bobcats had moved relative to where quail were nesting at, and like what their movements were. And I think, Will, to get to your question, we spend a lot of time in turkey biology. I'm going to tie that back in. We spend a lot of time in turkey biology looking at turkeys, right? We spend zero time. I mean, probably the last time anybody done anything real in depth on it was Mike Chamberlain's dissertation, right? And because he looked at a lot of predation stuff back in the early 2000s, and maybe Mike Byrne looking at raccoons. But we spend a lot of time talking about just the turkeys, and we don't spend a lot of time studying the species that ultimately are what is affecting nest success. We spend a lot of time talking about increasing nest success by trapping. And just for everybody out there that's listening, I'm pro recreational trapping and fur bearer harvest. It's a fantastic sport that I partake in when I can myself. But the expectations need to be tempered, in that, the old remove one raccoon or possum does not equate to add one successful turkey nest. That relationship does not exist. It is unknown for wild turkeys, and what we do know about that relationship for other species, like say waterfowl, is unequivocal at best. And so keep that in mind here. But whenever we talk about this whole kind of predation dynamic, it's really hard to wrap your head around what we're actually getting at, right? We should probably be tagging a bunch of coyotes, just as an example, a bunch of coyotes and bobcats in areas where we're following turkeys, if we really want to understand how those interactions get together. There's a paper that'll be coming out soon looking at about 20 coyotes in Georgia.
I was going to say, didn't Mike do that on BF Grant?
Patrick Whiteman, his PhD student, did.
We are doing that in the Florida work as well.
Good.
We're pending the funds to do it, but coyotes in particular. And Will and I just had a discussion on one of our first predation things about coyotes, wondering about the coyote relationship. But
Patrick's, I think his paper got accepted in landscape ecology. I don't want to like Trump is, cheering for that, but it was 20 individuals. The relationship wasn't super strong. But I mean, you're talking about 20 coyotes, and maybe there only 3 or 4 of them are going to interact with birds over the course of a week or whatever. So it really requires a lot of high intensity, highly detailed information. My personal guess on most predation is bobcats. If I was really to lay it down, I think most of it's bobcats. I think bobcats are out there in the woods, and that they're pretty efficient hunters. I think that them and coyotes are probably 1 and 2. I think owls don't get enough credit, but they're a lot harder to study. But the question is, and I hate to be the naysayer here, but what are we going to do about it?
Right.
I mean, we're not going to suddenly go out and we're not going to go out and just get rid of all the bobcats or get rid of all the coyotes in the landscape. A, it's not going to happen. And B, everybody knows that as soon as you take out the dominant coyote that are territorial, right? Bobcats have land tenure and coyotes are very territorial. If you take out the dominant pair, instead of having 2, you're going to have 6 because all the juveniles are going to roll in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is that a good, focus for us from a turkey conservation perspective to spend effort on managing those species? Research on them is important in my mind. From what habitat or vegetative communities do they select against going in, and are those highly useful for turkeys? And can we, create some mismatch on the landscape to where the coyotes want to be and the turkeys want to be aren't the same spots?
Mm-hmm.
And Aaron had done a little bit, kind of some preliminary work on that with trail cameras. And this was a little different because it's not at the nest site. But a student of mine, Erin Ulrey, who's was doing her master's with me, she's now doing a PhD at the University of Georgia. We went and put cameras in kind of like the 2-hectare buffer around where a nest was, randomly spaced, so we could see potentially what predators were coming to these nest sites and when for actual nesting turkeys without disturbing anything or pushing them on the nest. And we had sites where we'd have feral hogs every freaking day and the nest would be successful. And we'd have a site where we'd see 1 coyote and the nest would be failed the next day. And we'd have a site where we would see 1 pig and the next would be failed the next day, right? So it was kind of it wasn't at the nest site, but it was more spatially pushed out, kind of around we called it the incubation area where we were surveying. To try and get a better.
You said 2 hectares, right? So that's about 5
about
acres.
2 hectares. Yeah, something like that. Around 5 acres.
Yeah.
Kind of around. That's kind of the area that the hens were using, and we found some, I don't want to, tentative evidence that there are certain areas that some of these potential species that would eat turkeys or nests would not go into. Raccoons are riparian focused species, generally speaking, right? We don't see them running across the uplands that often. And if it is, it's circular, right? They start, they leave, and they come back. So we wouldn't see a lot of evidence at raccoons at a lot of our sites, but we see coyotes and bobcats all over the place.
Right.
In the uplands, because that's where turkeys want to be, right? So I think that over the long term, it's going to come down to managing the vegetative communities that are good for turkeys, but then may displace predators. Obviously, more usable space is better. I think that everybody in the world can agree that creating more available habitat and more usable space is beneficial. The reality of that is it's going to have to occur on private lands. That's it. I mean, there's no way that public lands can support this.
So let me follow up on that, Bret.
Absolutely.
So I like this idea a lot. It's challenging me, and I like that. So instead of trying to manage for a place that turkeys really like, we could, like you've said multiple times, try to create a place that the predators that push the hen off the nest don't like. So that's one.
Sorry for
one
saying
way
it so many times.
No. I think that's good fodder for thought to challenge us all. But another way that you could potentially go about this is to create more space that turkeys like, so that you also sort of swamp the predator in terms of where it's hunting. So maybe everything that you're thinking the turkey likes is also something the coyotes like, but you've made so much of it now that they're
Yes.
kind of, it's the needle in the haystack kind of approach. So you could go either
Right.
way with that. Or
It's
do you
the
think you
inverse we
could?
see for. Sorry, go ahead.
Do you think you could go either way with that? You
Yeah,
could
well, I
create
mean,
more of the things they avoid, or create so much that you kinda inundate the predator.
I think we could, right? Because so you think about things like predator swamping with waterfowl, right? I mean, they
Mhm,
nest in ridiculously high densities in the prairie regions, and there's just so many birds
mhm,
there that the predators they just get swamped, right? I mean, there's just I'm more successful, or the group's likelihood of being successful is higher when we're all together.
mhm,
Turkeys don't do that. Okay.
mhm,
Jody Shapp showed in, I think it was '05, that these birds, and we're seeing it now, these birds spread out during nesting.
mhm,
Hmm.
They want to be, generally speaking, they don't want to be right on top of each other. There are exceptions, correct? Um,
mhm,
it could go either way. We either Everybody knows that managing vegetation and managing habitats is the number one thing that all of us preach, right?
mhm.
Every biologist in the world preaches that. I don't know if we're doing a good job of it. I'm just
On the
thinking,
preaching
think
part, or the
no, we're
habitat part,
preaching
or
our
both?
asses off. I'm not sure it's getting through. It's getting through to the people that can get through to, but how much impact are we having on the landscape from this on the private lands that sustain the spur? I mean, turkey conservation has historically and will in the future rely entirely on what happens on private land. So if it's easier to say, under farm bills, or putting more CRP on the ground or all that kind of stuff in the southeastern United States, if it's easier to manage for more, such that the birds are able to spread out,
Mhm.
awesome. If we can't do that, then maybe we need to manage for different. And to be honest, we as a field, and I'm going to include myself there, we are extremely rutted to the idea that more is better. Maybe targeted worse is better if it's targeted at the right species. And
Mhm.
and I don't and you know and I don't know what the right answer for
So,
all of this
when you say
is,
target,
but
like, you're just saying you're
bad for bobcats.
yes.
So if we
So
can create
creating bad
stuff
for
that's
bobcats is by
it's
default good for
marginal for
turkeys.
turkeys, but bad for bobcats, means it's better for turkeys than something that's good for turkeys and good for bobcats,
Mm.
right? And I don't
Yeah.
know that that's yeah, I don't know that that's possible. It's a tough nut to crack, right? So we've
Well,
always went with the easier, create more usable space,
yeah. Well,
but
and
it's not doing
you're
us
right,
much
though.
good.
You may not be able to create enough of it at the scale needed so that the 2 being preferential, like,
Mhm,
if bobcats and turkeys like to use the same place, one to nest in and the other one
mhm.
to eat the hen in, then we would, the strategy has been to create so much of that the bobcat kinda gets saturated in that interaction. But, so we've
You just
focused a
created
lot on
better
that, but
spaces for more turkeys.
we may not be able to create enough of it. So what happens is, when you see these estimates and some of these studies with single digit portions of the landscape being in that kind of vegetation, now it's kind of becoming a trap,
Yeah.
because they're still going to nest in that.
Hmm.
Mhm. Absolutely.
But all the bobcats are also going to hunt in that.
They're going to get predated every time.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
That's
And
interesting.
you have to think about a little turkey history here. Nest depredation rates now are high relative to 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, generally speaking.
Hmm.
I'm not, and I mean, we're talking not a difference from 100% success to, 20% success. We're talking, 35% success to 20% success to 15%, that type of transition.
Hmm.
We don't have a handle at all, nationally, locally, regionally, anything, on any sort of changes in the meso carnivore guild,
Hmm.
right? We
Yeah.
have no
We've talked about
clue.
this.
Yeah,
Mhm.
well, I don't want to we have no idea what's actually out there.
No, yeah, this is
Most
a
of
good
the
point.
yeah, most of the data that we get comes from trapping records
Mhm.
Right,
or ad hoc survey information,
right.
that kind of jazz. So, you look at something like T. Wayne's paper, looking at the trapping records for raccoons, right? That all hinges on all kinds of stuff we don't have information about. So I don't know if we have more predatory species now than we used to, or if we just have less space that turkeys want to be in now that we used to, and that's led to what you were
Mhm.
getting at, where
They're
turkeys want
more
to be in
vulnerable.
this,
Yeah.
predators want to be, things that want to eat turkeys want to be in this. They're all packed into smaller space, so the attack rate, not to get overly scientific, but the old Locke to Volterra attack rate stuff, right? The
Mhm.
alpha is now higher because we've reduced the amount of space around it.
Yeah. So let me
Um,
ask you, Brett, one thing that
sure.
came up between us, Will and I, in one of our previous episodes about coyotes, and it sounds like they're one that the hen is vulnerable to.
Yeah.
Uh, it hasn't been that long in a lot of the East, especially up, I think Will said in the Atlantic states, but uh, that they have moved into the eastern United States
Mhm.
relatively recently.
Yeah.
And some of those early studies that you were talking about, where there was a little bit higher nest success, in some of those places was probably before there were coyotes there, or at least before they were really well established. And I want,
Yeah, but you
do you think
can
that
look.
the coyotes could be playing a role in that difference and
I can't
success that
say
we're seeing?
no. No, I mean, that's not a bad point, and I can't say no, but I'd caveat that with, you got to think about the fact that, one of the monographs, Van Gilder's work, was done in the '80s in Missouri.
Yeah,
There
and
are
they
coyotes all over the
they've
place.
had coyotes there for yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Rumble's been
Yeah.
working in the Dakotas for decades,
Hmm.
and there's been coyotes out there. I mean, and all the old Rio Grande work in Texas. I mean, there've always been coyotes in
Yeah.
the rolling
There,
plains and everything. So I don't
here,
know.
here's one thing though that I think ties into a lot of our conversation, sort of as a alternative perspective on that. And a lot of those landscapes where the coyotes have been there a long time, they're also really open
Mhm.
compared to the southeastern U.S. by and large, anyway. So I
Fair enough. Yeah.
wonder if some of the stuff you were talking about earlier, could coyotes moving into that environment actually heighten the risk of the turkeys to it
Oh,
because the
absolutely. Yeah.
landscape context is
Because
so much different.
yeah, I mean the plains of Kansas or northeastern Missouri are a hell of a lot different than the national forest, the Ozarks of Arkansas,
Yeah, yeah.
or someplace. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could, for any species. I don't think it would be
Mhm.
coyote specific, but for any potential predatory species, you could see their usable space
Yeah.
collapsing. And if it's collapsed, they're able to search, cover, whatever,
Mhm.
term you want to use, more area more intensely, which could lead to increased predation for sure.
Mhm.
I don't think I think that's a viable hypothesis.
Yeah.
We did some restoration work. I say we, Louisiana Department of Wildlife Fisheries did some restoration work in Northwest Cattle Parish, Louisiana, in 13, 14, 15, and maybe a little earlier than that. And those birds were put in, and they went off like gangbusters. Super high nest success and all that kind of jazz. And seem to have stabilized out now, about consistent with Western Louisiana. Um, and we do. I mean, there's coyotes up there. I mean, we get coyotes on camera traps all the time whenever we're looking at the nesting stuff and everything. So philosophically, I agree with you that it's possible. Um, I can't even fathom how you could strategically try to understand that dynamic, though.
Mhm.
I mean, I suppose you could backdoor into looking at range sizes for coyotes in larger areas, and then use some of the work that has been done in the southeast. Oh, I can't remember his name.
Well, I think one thing that could be cool, it links back to what you were saying earlier when you're looking at let's say we took coyotes and we're gonna try to address this question. If you
Mhm.
It'd be kind of interesting to look at across the range, maybe of multiple subspecies of turkeys in very different landscape contexts,
Mhm.
and see how much they overlap, like the search behavior from the coyote with the nesting site selection of the turkeys.
That's what the faculty member there at A&M did at the Rolling Plains quail thing with bobcats. Looked
Yeah,
at how
right. So if you did that
I
with
can't remember her
coyotes,
name.
but you did it
Yeah,
across multiple states and a
yeah,
lot of different places, maybe you could start to get at something like that that's really interesting. Another
yeah,
thing
because
that
it's
popped into my
compacted
head is
space use. Yeah.
yeah, another thing that came to my head is I think about, a coyote, what's it doing in some of these really dense places? A lot of times they're just running up and down roads. And then what is a hen? Is the hen seeing a search cue for the edge of the road where you got a little more high sunlight and now she lays her nest close to the road? Like, are we constraining them together
Yeah,
with
I
that
mean, that
kind
was
of
the
Well,
thing, a main thing that I was thinking about when you think about, some of the work that I've done with coyotes and you see them using these upland areas that are relatively open, clear cuts, really young forest, and then on the other end of the spectrum, mature forest that has an open canopy and a lot of understory structure. I mean, these are the places that coyotes like to use that hens do too.
Mhm.
no, absolutely. And you think about some of the areas. I'm not going to say that are poorly managed, but areas that aren't actively managed for wildlife, right? Industrial forests, that kind of stuff. Not that's not a criticism of industrial
Yeah,
forests,
they
right?
have a
Just
different objective.
so, different objectives. Some of them aren't, right? If
Mhm.
you're going to Chippenwood at 27 years, then you got a different objective, and you'll see a lot of the historic turkey research has looked at nest site placement as a function from distance to road, right?
Mhm.
Because that's where the sunlight gets through. They
Yeah.
keep them roadsides wide and everything, and you see a lot of nests in there. And, as Will said, I mean, you're coursing species, your coyotes, and then to a lesser extent, your bobcats are using those as places to hunt. So you've kind of artificially said, okay, this is what's going to be available to a turkey within this landscape. And
Yeah.
you, in this example,
So
stuck the turkeys into a place where you're going to have more chance of interaction of,
mhm.
of a bobcat and a coyote. So it
Yeah,
kind of
sort of
circles
it's
back,
like
I think.
that ecological trap concept in
Absolutely.
ecology.
That's what
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to say. It circles back to what you said earlier about,
Mhm.
the usable space idea. If we had more usable space, there'd be less interactions. But if we have
Yeah.
less, and it's exactly what both of them want to be in, we've created a
Right.
trap for them. And
Yeah.
the place I've seen this the most readily apparent has been a couple of sites in East Texas with Yopon, right? Creating
Mm.
that fence line border
Mm.
on in the forests where
Mhm.
the only herbaceous grassy areas are along roads and
Yeah.
trails, and that's
Yeah.
where the
So
females seem to key.
it may not even be the amount available, it may just be the arrangement of it,
Yes.
like the shape or
Mhm.
juxtaposition of things together. It's just if you take the same amount of good space to nest in and arrange it in a way that makes it really easy to hunt efficiently,
One
that's a
long strip, yeah.
yeah. Well,
No, I
like
agree
it
completely.
might be if it's the roadside where the only sunlight getting in is.
Mhm.
Yeah,
No,
that's a
So,
really interesting
I'm in
discussion.
lockstep with you on it because it's turkey conservation is hard. Like with, I mean, it's not deer, right? And I don't say that jokingly, but I mean,
Well,
we studied deer forever, and amazingly enough, there's always things we don't know about deer, right?
mhm,
But we never seem to have any problems managing deer. Our problem is we have too many of them, not too few, generally speaking. Turkey conservation is hard because you're dealing with a species that has a pretty selective niche they like to be in for the most important time of their year. And when they're in that niche, they're absolutely the most vulnerable
mhm,
that you can be, and they've got to be there for a month, give or take a couple of days, right? I mean, they're gonna be
yeah,
tied. They're actually gonna be tied to that spot for like 40 some odd days. So you basically take you know a twelfth of this critter's year and say, hey, you're gonna be right here, don't die. And
right,
then we've got to
and
try and figure out how to create the best stuff around it that it doesn't die, but that we don't draw in everything that wants to eat it.
yeah.
It's a real
Well,
conundrum to
no
work under.
yeah, and it's also they are on the ground at night. You're taking their senses that are most keen,
Yep.
their eyesight in particular, and yeah, it's definitely putting them in a really hard situation.
And I mean, I wish I had all the answers. It would make my life a lot easier. But but science comes in incremental steps, right?
Yeah. Well, part of
And
it is doing what we're doing right here, where we're challenging the status quo and thinking about this in different
yeah, and
viewpoints.
I mean, if you'd asked me 20 years ago who the biggest predator species of turkey causing turkey nest failures were, I'd have been screaming bobcats and coyotes and raccoons and possums and skunks and blah
Hmm.
blah blah. And I've just kind of over time, I don't want to say matured or grown because that doesn't sound right. I've rethought a little bit about what I'm actually trying to figure out process wise.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure. I mean, there's no right or wrong here. So I and others are thinking about this process, trying to figure out what we can do to adjust, tweak what we're doing for turkey conservation. Is it creating? It's obviously more space. But is it a different kind of space? You know, doing a study like we were talking kind of before the episode started, trying to figure out the relative implications of trapping as a management tool is extremely difficult when you're talking about a group of birds that might have 12 or 14 breeding individuals in a flock that are going to encompass hundreds of square miles when they go off to nest, right?
Hmm.
Just based on every direction. You're trying to go in there and clear that area of of one predator species over multiple years just to look at the effect size. It's untenable. You can't do it.
Hmm.
It's easier to do for things like waterfowl. You literally go put a fence around the ponds and
Hmm.
trap the crap out of it, and they land inside of it, and you're done. Um, so I don't know. I think the solution is going to be coming at it scientifically from different way. What are the predator species doing? What kind of vegetative communities are they using? Um, can selective removals help? I don't know. My gut instinct says no because they're not targeted towards the primary predatory species. Like you
Hmm.
said earlier, Marcus, the raccoons and possums and skunks and that kind of stuff. And we do have a lot of
Yeah.
people that trap coyotes, but they're just not targeted
Hmm.
enough.
Well, and
So
some of
along
them you
those
can't target.
so
Yeah,
along
and some
those
of them you can't, like
lines,
owls.
Hmm.
so along
Sorry,
those
Will.
lines, Brett, if you could effectively implement predator control in the case of trying to boost turkey nest success, you would be better off to target coyotes and bobcats than say raccoons
100%.
and possums.
100%. And I've said this before. So if we're trying to turkey nest success hinges on the female staying alive. That's it. That's the brake lever right there. Okay. If she dies, then the teeter totter goes the other way. Okay.
Hmm.
If I was strictly trying to ensure increased nest success, I would focus on the only two things I could focus on, which would be bobcats and coyotes. Foxes might be in there. Honestly, I'm unclear. I mean, I'm sure fox will eat a turkey, right? I know they'll eat poults. I'm unclear of what impact they have on nesting hens. I really am, right? But those would be the only two you could focus on because we can't do anything with owls. To the listeners, you shouldn't. Don't mess with owls. Um,
Mm.
but that would be it to keep the female alive. Because if the female's alive, she stays on the nest, etc., etc.
Well, and you
All
also
of it's
potentially have
sorry.
years of her doing that multiple
Yes.
years in a row. So that
Well,
was.
that's actually an interesting point you bring up, and we've started like our research groups. That generally we're all kind of familiar with each other. We're
Mhm.
starting this for the listeners. Most of the babies are made by just a few hens. Okay, so
Mhm.
so a few females, and we got pretty good evidence of this right now. There are just a few females on the landscape, and they just make babies every year. Boom, 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 boom. And most of the rest of the females don't. So if we're able to increase the likelihood that those females that do live, that helps turkeys in the long run, right? Because our most productive females are making new babies every year. We're starting to see some pretty strong evidence of that in some of the data that we've been collecting, that, the same bird every year, boom, boom, successful nest, successful nest, successful nest,
Didn't you
And
guys have a paper just recently that actually, no, that I think that was the time, like where they were at in the. I'm trying to think. I think it's actually a preprint.
There's a lot, but which one is it? Was it an nesting
Yeah,
paper?
I can't. I don't know. You guys are really productive, and it's hard to keep up with what y'all are doing. But
there was a nesting paper that Allison Kiever did, who's a postdoc
no,
at
it
Tennessee
wasn't.
Tech.
Yeah, it wasn't that one. It was about the hen. I guess it was the timing. It was about the timing of the nest and relative to other nesting attempts. And I don't think it was what you're talking about now.
No, I'm trying to think. I could probably find out. I'm trying to remember all of them that we published in the last year. We've done work on reproductive timing. Allison's work, Allie's work showed that earlier nests were most successful every year. We had a paper we did some work that was in the bulletin in the Turkey Symposium that looked at some of the nest timing stuff as well. But I mean, that's also, I don't want to say becoming common knowledge, but everybody pretty much realizes that earlier nesting, which is typically your socially dominant older females, are generally more successful because it's made up of older, more experienced, socially dominant females that breed earlier, right? So it's kind of that weird infinite loop you get into. So I can remember that, and that's really what we're talking about when we get into longer term ideas of things like timing of harvest regulations. Someone might not think that, because this is something that I'm a proponent of, just because this ties in kind of into the nesting and the predation stuff, right? Every bit of research has ever been shown on turkeys has basically shown that the earlier you nest, the more likely you are to be successful as a group of nesting birds, right? So if you're on the early end of the spectrum, you're more likely to be successful than at the late end of the spectrum. And it's pretty big odds. I mean, it's like you're like 4 or 5 times more successful to be early. If you're early, you're 4 or 5 times more likely to be successful than if you're later in the nesting season, right? So some of the pushes that policy-related pushes that I've made, that Mike Chamberlain has made, that several people are doing research on, Will, I mean, you're involved, are looking at regulatory timing of hunting seasons. And we're proponents of season dates starting later. Everybody listening, my email is brett@lsu.edu. You can email me and tell me that I'm wrong. I am a proponent of season starting dates being later because it's not 3 weeks that matters. It's 3 days or 4 days of birds or 6 days of birds being able to breed and get out early before dominant breeding males are harvested. That can be the difference between 20 or 30% more nest success every year because you're getting those older females bred and out earlier. Okay, I don't care what happens with the juvenile hen that doesn't go nest the first time until the middle of May, right? I care about what's happening at the beginning of April. And, everybody says, oh, we don't talk about things like hunting season timing for other upland game birds, all right? My buddy Adam Butler has said this many times. Adam and I are good friends. I disagree with Adam 100% on this topic when it comes to reproductive ecology because we don't shoot pheasants in May. To use his example, we don't do that. We don't shoot pheasants in May. If we shot pheasants, if we went and shot ducks in June, the waterfowl community would be having a cow.
But I was going to say, is turkeys are they the only game bird that we shoot during
As
their?
far as I know, in the United States, maybe there's a grouse that we harvest during the reproductive season, but turkeys are the only
Yeah,
upland game bird that we hunt not at the peak of breeding season, usually before it. And if
yeah.
you look at Healy and Powell's 99 work, they actually say that we shouldn't open any turkey hunting seasons
Mm-hmm.
until after the midpoint of reproduction, which
Right.
for our data generally is late April, right? Just based on
Yeah.
when half the
Mm-hmm.
nests are done. So a lot of states have started to push that starting date back because turkeys are the only species that we shoot in the middle of their reproductive season, and it drives me nuts when people say we need to shoot them earlier, and I'm willing to die on this hill, right? Because they're the
Well,
only one we do it to,
yeah.
and
Well, I was
everybody
going to
lose their
ask you.
mind if we shot deer in June or ducks or
Right.
whatever, but we're okay doing it with turkeys. But
That's
bringing
because they
that full
gobble.
term, that's because they gobble, right?
Yeah.
Although I did have one strutting on a trail camera at a trap site the other day. But bringing it full circle, if we get those 6 days, right? If those 6 days push out 3 more hens that are older, dominant, and more likely to be successful, then a 1 week lag, a 10-day lag, some of the stuff that's happened in Louisiana, South Carolina, Arkansas, that the only thing we're cutting back is the earliness with which people can get out and shoot birds.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd trade a few days for increased reproduction and longer term sustainability at the continental scale if it only cost me 3 or 4 days worth of breeding time, or a week worth of breeding time. So that's how it ties back into this whole reproductive thing that, and then bringing it full circle, predatory species typically have to catch up to the pulse, right? Like turkeys don't just get out on
Mm-hmm.
the landscape and then immediately they get predated. There's a lag in the time that it takes predators to realize they're available because they're not available year round.
Mm-hmm.
So early, less depredation, there's less predation. There usually are more dominant individuals. That type of thing is a win from a turkey conservation perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, related to that, so the Kiever paper, that one was the
Mm-hmm.
one. Is that the one we
Yeah, that
we
was
like to
Allie
share?
Kiever. She's a postdoc at
Yeah, I know
Tennessee
Allie.
Tech. Yeah, she's great, and she's working
Yeah.
for Brad Cohen over there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that one showed the relative success of the early hen.
Yes. Yeah, showed
So
relative
what?
success of the females. I think it was about there were 4 times, and I'm trying to go from memory here. I think they were about 4 times more likely to be successful earlier in the season than later in the season, and then the more vegetation they had around them, excuse me, had a minor but positive impact. But the
Mm-hmm.
major driver was when they nested, like early. It was
Mm-hmm.
temporal, right? And that was
Okay.
that was Allie's work, and she used about I don't know, she used 600 or 700 hens that we've been monitoring in the
Mm-hmm.
southeastern United States. So
Yeah, I looked at that paper. Um, yeah, so we like to share that stuff. What I
absolutely.
think about the links to the hunting. What
Mhm.
about what? Can you direct us to some literature on that?
Oh, I
I
mean,
think that's where the.
Healy and Powell's force or their federal technical report that they wrote in '99 is the Bible on that, and it's common knowledge that's been lost. I mean, people have talked about it even during restoration that hunting and reproduction are generally going to be linked together. And sociopolitical pressures being what they are, and opportunity being important. I'm a turkey hunter. I
Mm-hmm.
love turkey hunting. I want to be in the woods as early as possible, right? Historically, what's happened is we've from a field, always moved to have earlier and earlier seasons, and we've uncoupled reproduction from harvest because in all other species it's uncoupled.
Mm-hmm.
All other species of wildlife. I mean, deer aren't not getting bred because older male deer are getting shot. The 1.5-year-olds are in there doing their business, right? We've uncoupled that in turkeys for some reason. and it needs to be recoupled. And Healy and Powell has long been the Bible on that. And it's a federal technical report. It's publicly available. If you need a copy, I've got a copy. I can send you as a PDF.
We
And
have
I
it.
think it's chapter 5, maybe, where he talks about it. And Bill's one of the. We're all on Bill's coattails, right? It's Bill Healy. We're all on his coattails professionally. And if he says it, and he said it probably better and more elegantly 20 years before. But it's a really good resource for anybody, because it's about harvest management and how harvest balances with reproduction and survival and everything. And it's a really good read too. And it's not overly long either. So.
Yeah, and it's because of the way it's published, anybody can have it.
Yeah, anybody can have it. You can Google it. Email me. I'll send you a copy of it. I got a PDF.
Yeah, we'll provide a link to it as well.
Yeah, you guys will put it up. So, yeah, but I don't want to get too far off of predation, but it's all tied together, right?
It's still
more
predation.
Turkeys die more turkeys die every year because of a load of 3.5 fours or 3-inch fours than probably anything else.
Well, and maybe you can. I don't want to get us on a different rabbit hole because we've been going a while, but I've also wondered about hunters, and because I have been that hunter, and I also love hunting, particularly turkeys. I wonder about, we have this huge flush of hunting, up front in the first part of the season, and I have bumped a hen off the nest more than one time. I just wonder, you're talking about flushing hens from the nest. I wonder how much role that plays.
We've got data on that. South Carolina, we have GPS units on hunters out there for Elena Garrett's work years ago. And it was at the Webb Center WMA complex. There's a complex of 3 WMAs down there. We just kind of call them the Webb Center. And we GPS tagged 1,500 hunters, and it was pretty infrequently.
I think Will got the genotype on a few.
Yeah, maybe. It was pretty infrequently that the hunters interacted with the nests, but part of that's also timing. Okay, the average incubation start date usually is about the end of the second week of April. About 80% of your hunting is done. So most people, and this is a big hand waving Bret right now. Okay, most people turkey hunt early. And by the time that those females are starting to sit, they're actually starting to incubate, right? They've finished laying and they're incubating. Most hunters aren't in the woods, right? Because of how timing works. It obviously happens. I've pushed a female off a nest a time or two. Obviously on accident, right?
Well, maybe an early hen in the late hunting.
Yeah. But as long as you're in and out, most of the time they don't go real far, So if you bust her off and she's 20 yards away from you or whatever, you just kind of turn and wander off. Almost all the time they come back. We haven't got any really strong. And it obviously happens, right? And it happens more whenever people flush the hen and then they immediately go to the nest site and take a picture and put it up on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Hey, look, I found a turkey. Don't do that. See the hen fly off, walk the other direction.
We just got through saying that's the same thing.
Yeah, but it does happen.
Yeah.
But it's not. I'm not worried about that. Generally speaking, the distribution, the intersection between hunters and hens is probably pretty low. And probably there are a lot of hens that are out there that hunters walk right by and they're 20 yards out of the way and they never even know that they're there. I've done it too.
You've probably done that a lot with tagged birds, and they're right there, and you're still.
I have circled. Well, not so much me anymore because I'm older and fatter, and my job is to, as I'm sure your guys is, do budgets and administer and solve HR problems and all that kind of stuff. But yes, I've searched in exactly where I thought a hen was and have her be behind me, and I'm carrying an equipment that tells me where her tag is at. So, that kind of stuff, I'm sure it happens. I'm sure that it's not awesome, but I don't think it has population level ramifications at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think it's one off, and as long as the hunters don't disturb the nest, that it's not anything that we really need to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't walk out there every single day.
Right.
I wouldn't go put a camera on it. Yeah. I mean, we do know for a fact that from a lot of camera studies that, if you put a camera on something, other stuff gets drawn to the camera.
Mm-hmm.
Like the physical fact that there's a camera there will draw some species to the camera, birds and, that kind of stuff. Deer will come up and sniff it. So you don't want to go to a nest, like, oh, there's a nest, let's put a camera on and see what's happening, and then bring a whole bunch of other stuff in there that doesn't need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Will,
I've flushed a few.
You've been
Will got busy there doing something. Are they catching turkeys? Hang on, let me see if I got an update yet. I'm looking. Hang on. Nope, no update yet. Nope, no update from the gang. They must be sitting second net today. So I hope I didn't ramble too much. I don't want people to be bored.
No. This is what we wanted to have the discussion. The predation thing is that's the issue that goes viral. We'll just say that's what everybody wants to argue about over online, and we're trying to present, as we've said multiple times, is the most well-rounded discussion about it as possible. And after having some discussion with you about the predation versus scavenging, we thought that was a necessary part of that discussion.
I may be wrong. I'll be honest. I mean, and I may be wrong.
It needs to challenge us all to be thinking about it, even if you were. That still, we need to be challenged and be thinking about it. We've obviously not solved it, whatever the problem is, so we've got to keep challenging each other. But anyway, we really appreciate you taking some time to come back and talk to us again. Even though I think this is going to be the first episode with you.
I'm good with that. It's just the second person. Yeah. And if you want that paper, because I'm sure you want to put it up with us.
Yeah, we like to link all of them. Yeah,
it was Nathan. The last name was Fife, Fiffe. Yeah, Nathan Fife, and it was a
What was it?
Crap.
Was that
I
the
can send you
Wilsons?
a PDF of it, but it was a like predation paper on Goulds, and if you give me like 20 seconds, and I'll find it for you. Maybe.
Okay. Possibly. Yeah, we'll link it in the show notes. Yeah,
I'll email it to you as soon as we get off. Yeah, and it's really cool because it's actually got the photographs in it.
Yeah.
So you can see the fox with his head, and you can see the bears walking by and see the turkey. Oh, it's a great little paper. So.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, please do share.
No, Will, you all right, buddy?
Anything you want to?
I'm good.
Anything you want to leave the audience with, Bret?
No, I mean, I enjoy doing this, and part of our job, my job, all of our jobs as university faculty members is to engage with the public as much as possible to, put conservation on the ground. The only thing I'd say is, if anybody ever wants to contact me or get information, don't hesitate to shoot me a message. I'll respond. I'm not super social media savvy, and I plan on generally staying that way. But I can always be met, got at my email address, or you can find me on the various like Instagrams and Twitter, and these guys can get you in touch with me. And if there's a paper you want to see or pictures or anything like that, I'm more than happy to share, because I think that the more information we can get out, the better off we're all doing. So
yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thanks again, and thanks everybody out there for listening. It's been a great conversation, and hope you all learned something from it. Let us know if you have thoughts or questions, or want to get in contact for anything.
Yep, appreciate it, Bret.
Yeah, thanks, Bret.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.